A shipwreck changed the course of Western philosophy. Around 300 BCE, a Phoenician merchant named Zeno of Citium was sailing with a cargo of precious purple dye when a storm sent his ship to the bottom of the sea. Stranded in Athens with nothing but the clothes on his back, Zeno wandered into a bookshop to pass the time. There he picked up a copy of Xenophon's Memorabilia, a tribute to Socrates. Enraptured by the portrayal of the wise Socrates calmly debating virtue, Zeno asked the bookseller, "Where can I find a man like this?" At that moment, the Cynic philosopher Crates happened to be walking by. The bookseller pointed to him and said, "Follow that man." So Zeno became a pupil of Crates, trading his merchant robes for a threadbare cloak. Years later Zeno would joke, "I made a prosperous voyage when I was shipwrecked," meaning that losing all his worldly goods was the best fortune. It led him to philosophy. Indeed, from that twist of fate grew a whole new school of thought, Stoicism. Zeno's personal journey from the extreme asceticism of the Cynics, as exemplified by Diogenes of Sinope, to a more moderate, systematic philosophy laid the foundation for Stoicism, which would flourish for centuries. The story of Zeno and his Cynic influences is a tale of continuity and innovation, how Stoicism took the torch from Cynicism and carried it forward. Zeno was born around 334 BCE in Citium, a Greek city on the island of Cyprus. He was of mixed Phoenician-Greek heritage. His father was a merchant who often traveled to Athens, bringing back books on philosophy for his studious son. Young Zeno likely grew up bilingual, speaking Greek but with Semitic ancestry. He followed in his father's trade initially. It was that fateful shipwreck, around age 22 according to tradition, that deposited him in Athens and set him on a new path. After studying with Crates the Cynic, Zeno also spent time learning from other philosophers, the Megarian Stilpo, known for logic and dialectic, and perhaps the Academy of Xenocrates. But none captured his allegiance as the Cynic approach did, at least at first. Zeno embraced the austere life, wearing a coarse cloak, eating little, and eschewing comforts. Yet Zeno was by nature more moderate and decorous than some of the flamboyant Cynics. The Athenians found this tall, thin foreigner peculiar but earnest. Despite his shabby cloak, he gained respect for his serious character and self-discipline. They nicknamed him Phoenician, and reportedly, the conqueror of pride, since he was immune to flattery or insult. After about 2 decades of studying and refining his ideas, Zeno began to teach his own philosophy. Rather than founding a formal school in a private garden or academy, he held classes in the open air of Athens's Stoa Poikile, the painted porch, a public colonnade decorated with frescoes of heroic battle scenes. From this location Zeno's followers became known as Stoics, literally people of the porch. It was an appropriate setting. Stoicism would always emphasize engaging with society and politics, not retreating from the public square. Zeno taught in the Stoa Poikile for many years, becoming a fixture of Athenian intellectual life. He was admired for practicing what he preached. One anecdote says that once a rich man trailed Zeno to learn his philosophy, but seeing Zeno's simple lifestyle, how little he owned and how temperately he lived, the man lost interest. He couldn't separate the teachings from the teacher's ascetic example. The Athenians, who could be tough on outsiders, came to honor Zeno. They even gave him the keys to their city and erected a tomb in his honor when he died around 262 BCE. Zeno's death itself is fodder for legend. One story holds that at age 72 he tripped and broke his toe leaving the school. Seeing this as a sign that it was time to depart life, Stoics held that very old age might be a reasonable time for a sage to exit. Zeno reportedly quoted a line from a tragic play, "I come of my own accord, why call me thus?" and then calmly strangled himself. Whether true or apocryphal, the tale underscores Zeno's Stoic acceptance of fate to the last. To understand Zeno's philosophy we must explore the influence of Cynicism, especially as embodied by Diogenes of Sinope, the legendary Cynic of the generation before Zeno. Diogenes, c. 404–323 BCE, was the ultimate anti-establishment philosopher, a man who literally lived in a large ceramic jar in Athens, or Corinth according to some accounts, owning almost nothing, flaunting conventions and preaching that virtue is the only good. He and his fellow Cynics sought to live according to nature in the rawest sense, rejecting societal norms, possessions, and even basic decencies to expose how artificial much of civilized life was. Diogenes would walk the streets in daylight with a lantern saying he was looking for an honest man. He heckled Plato, befriended stray dogs, hence the name Cynic from kynikos, dog-like. and even, in a famous meeting, defiantly told Alexander the Great to stand out of my sunlight when the conqueror offered to grant him any favor. Diogenes' wit and shocking behavior aim to illustrate that happiness and freedom are achieved by wanting nothing and fearing nothing. If you can shamelessly live like a dog, eating scraps, sleeping in public, uncaring of others' opinions, then you are truly free from all the false needs society foists on you. Young Zeno, upon arriving in Athens, fell in with Crates, who was a follower of Diogenes. Crates tried to break Zeno of any residual vanity or attachment. In one tale, Crates made Zeno carry a pot of lentil soup through the busy market. When Zeno was mortified and tried to hide it under his cloak, Crates smashed the pot, splattering Zeno with soup to drive out his shame. This harsh training was meant to inculcate Cynic humility. Zeno did learn the lesson of placing virtue above opinion or comfort. However, Zeno's own temperament was milder. Unlike Diogenes, Zeno didn't actively court public outrage or live in utter squalor. As one contemporary noted, Zeno's remarks and rebukes could be biting and similar in tone to statements Diogenes would have made. Yet Zeno himself lived a life of traditional Athenian respectability while refusing to compromise his principles. He essentially civilized Cynicism. Let's compare Cynicism versus Stoicism, as this transition is central to Zeno's contribution. Metaphysics and system. The Cynics were suspicious of theory. They left no systematic writings, focusing purely on ethics and example. Zeno, by contrast, developed a comprehensive philosophical system. He integrated logic, the study of reasoning and rhetoric, and physics, the study of nature and the cosmos, with ethics. Stoicism as a school taught that the universe is an ordered whole, governed by divine logos or reason, and that human reason is a fragment of that divine fire positions influenced by Heraclitus and others. Cynics didn't articulate such cosmology, Stoics did, giving Stoicism a broader intellectual foundation than Cynic thought. Virtue and indifference. Both Cynics and Stoics held that virtue is the only true good and that external things, health, wealth, etc., are not truly good or bad in themselves. The difference is in nuance. Cynics basically disregarded externals entirely, to the point of courting their opposites. They embraced poverty, welcomed hardship, and thumbed their noses at any convention. They would even perform bodily functions or sexual acts in public to show their disdain for social mores. Stoics, however, introduced the idea of preferred indifference. That is, while virtue is the only good, things like health, material comfort, and social acceptability are naturally preferred and can be used appropriately, provided you don't become attached to them. A Stoic doesn't need to live in a tub or wear rags if doing so brings no additional virtue. One can wear decent clothes and live in a house. The key is, you remain ready to part with these externals without distress if fate demands. This made Stoicism a more palatable philosophy for people engaged in society like statesmen, merchants, soldiers, whereas Cynicism's extreme austerity was a calling for the very few. Role in society, Cynics were often solitary wanderers, intentionally marginal figures shouting truth at the crowd. Diogenes delighted in mocking Alexander and other authority figures, but he had no use for government or social duties. Stoicism, starting with Zeno, took a different path. Zeno envisaged an ideal cosmopolis, world city, where all humans live as one community, governed by reason. Stoics believed one should play their part in society's roles, as citizen, parent, friend, in accordance with nature and virtue. Thus, Stoics could be found advising kings, as Seneca did, or themselves ruling, as Marcus Aurelius did. Zeno himself taught kings, Antigonus II. Gonatas of Macedonia was said to be his student, and although Zeno declined invitations to move to court, he corresponded with rulers. The Stoic ideal was to transform society from within, whereas the Cynic ideal was to stand apart and serve as a living critique of society. Emotion and discipline. The Cynics, by focusing on minimal needs and shamelessness, aimed to eliminate desire and fear. Stoics continued that goal, but formalized the psychology of it. Zeno and his successors analyzed how wrong judgments cause passions, and they advocated continual mindfulness of one's impressions. The famous Stoic motto, "Live according to nature," was actually used by both schools, but with slightly different meaning. For Cynics, it meant living as naturally as an animal, stripping away culture. For Stoics, it meant living in accordance with the rational nature shared by humans and the cosmos, fulfilling one's natural duties as a rational social creature. Zeno never disparaged the Cynics. He honored Diogenes and Crates as great men who lived Stoic truths in extreme form. But Zeno's genius was taking the ethic of virtue and self-sufficiency from Cynicism and wedding it to a richer doctrine of natural law and rational order. It made Stoicism both more moderate in practice and broader in appeal without losing the core ideal of inner freedom. The Stoic sage, like the Cynic, is free and happy regardless of externals, but he or she might outwardly look more like everyone else, working, marrying, engaging, albeit with a profound difference in attitude. Though none of Zeno's many written works survive, we know their titles and fragments via later summaries such as by Diogenes Laertius. His impact is evident in the framework that later Stoics elaborated. Zeno taught that the goal of life, telos, is to live in agreement with nature, which means both living in harmony with the universe's providential order and living true to one's own rational and social nature. Virtue, arete, such as wisdom, justice, courage, and temperance, is the only true good because it alone leads to that harmonious life. Zeno famously said that a virtuous life flows like a smoothly running wagon. Even if one wheel falls slightly into a rut, the motion is in agreement when the wheel follows the track of the rut. So too, a person's life is in agreement when all desires and actions align with reason. He divided philosophy into three interconnected parts: logic, physics, and ethics. Logic, in Stoic hands, included not just formal reasoning but also theory of knowledge and even the study of language. Zeno may have begun the Stoic view that conceptions are derived from experience and that some impressions can attain a clarity that warrants assent as true, the basis of Stoic empiricism. Ethics was the crown, but it rested on understanding the physics, nature of the world, and using logic to avoid error. Zeno adopted Heraclitus's notion that the universe is pervaded by logos, a divine fire or reason that structures everything. This logos is identified with Zeus or God in Stoic theology, an immanent God that is the soul of the world. Nature is rational and providential, thus everything happens for a reason even if humans don't always perceive it. This belief in providence gave Stoics optimism and trust in accepting fate. A striking image from Zeno's reported teachings is the hand analogy of knowledge, which some attribute to him or early Stoics. Imagine a hand opened. That's impression, the raw data of sense. Now the hand half closed, that's assent, perceiving and acknowledging an impression. Now a fist, that's comprehension, a firm grasp of knowledge. Finally, place the other hand over the fist and squeeze. That is scientific understanding, systematic knowledge. This shows the Stoic concern with how we form reliable knowledge, a concern that distances them from the anti-theoretical streak of pure cynicism. Zeno's Republic, interestingly, was said to be a work envisioning a utopia where all humans live virtuously without need of law courts or temples, men and women dress alike, in the Cynic cloak, and live as one community without money or private marriages. This radical vision, perhaps partly tongue-in-cheek, shows Zeno's Cynic roots. However, his own school did not insist on such revolutionary practice in the here and now. It focused more on inner transformation while working within society as it was. One of Zeno's sayings passed down is, "We have 2 ears and 1 mouth, so we should listen more than we speak." This simple adage reflects Stoic emphasis on humility and learning, a far cry from the bombast of some philosophical rivals. It's a reminder that wisdom begins with paying attention to reality and others, rather than multiplying one's own opinions. That quote was famous enough that even centuries later it was attributed to Zeno in Diogenes Laertius's Anecdotes. Zeno practiced a gentle frugality. A story tells that once Zeno was offered a large sum of money by a patron. Zeno declined, saying the patron was better in need of funds to raise his own son. When the patron insisted Zeno take it for your sons, Zeno wryly said, "Then I will, and I will ensure they are raised well." Zeno had no children, so it was a subtle refusal by jest. In another instance, a tyrant asked Zeno for advice on best guarding his city. Zeno answered, "By populating it with only friends." Such responses highlight the Stoic idea that a community of wise, virtuous people needs few other defenses or laws. Zeno's direct legacy was carried on by his immediate students, notably Cleanthes, who succeeded him as head of the Stoic school. Cleanthes was a former boxer who came to Athens, and despite being slow of intellect by some accounts, so persevered in studying under Zeno that he earned admiration. Cleanthes worked watering gardens at night to afford studying by day. Zeno affectionately compared Cleanthes to an ass slow perhaps, but capable of carrying a great load of wisdom through sheer endurance. Cleanthes compiled and systematized Zeno's teachings, and he embodied the ethical rigor of Stoicism. Where Zeno built the framework, Cleanthes put some flesh on it. For example, Cleanthes wrote the beautiful hymn to Zeus, a prayer poem praising the rational divine order and urging humans to follow the logos that steers all things by law. This hymn became an enduring expression of Stoic religious sentiment, affirming Zeno's view of a providential cosmos. Cleanthes' devotion was such that the Roman Senate, centuries later, reportedly had his hymn recited in ceremonies. Another student of Zeno, Chrysippus, though a generation younger, would become the great systematizer of Stoicism, so much so that a later saying went, "Without Chrysippus, there would be no Stoic school." But it was Zeno who lit the flame that Chrysippus and others fanned into a bright blaze. Legacy of Zeno's Stoicism. Zeno's life and teachings initiated one of the most influential streams of Western philosophy. While the early Stoics like Zeno, Cleanthes, and Chrysippus were very much Greek philosophers talking to fellow Greeks, their ideas found fertile soil far beyond. Stoicism proved adaptable from the grand halls of Rome to the daily life of tradespeople. The Roman Stoics all traced their lineage back to Zeno and that painted porch. The Stoic school lasted nearly 5 centuries, evolving but holding to Zeno's core insight, that happiness comes from living virtuously in accord with nature. Zeno's own example, relinquishing wealth for wisdom, blending Socratic reasoning with Cynic toughness, remained a prototype. Later Stoics sometimes criticized the Cynics for extremism, yet they always respected Diogenes as a wise man who actually lived the philosophy. Marcus Aurelius in his Meditations thanks the gods for the example of the Cynic philosopher Diogenes and the writings of Epictetus. In modern times, Stoicism, revived by psychologists, entrepreneurs, and people seeking steady guidance, ultimately harks back to Zeno's stance at the Stoa. Picture him, a lean man in a simple tunic, gesturing calmly amid the bustle of Athens' marketplace, explaining to a small crowd that virtue is the sole good. It was a new note in the symphony of Greek philosophy, less otherworldly than Plato, less pleasure-seeking than Epicurus, as rational as Aristotle yet with the ascetic edge of Diogenes. When Zeno died, the Athenians honored him with a public burial and inscription, praising his self-discipline and mildness towards all. Zeno of Citium may have begun as a follower of Socrates gone mad, but he became the founder of a sanely grounded philosophy for the masses and elites alike. His legacy reminds us that sometimes losing everything can ignite a light that guides countless others. In Zeno's case, the light was Stoicism, a beacon of wisdom.